Welcome to today's episode, where we try and bring you insights from leaders outstanding in their field. In a world that's changing so rapidly around us with advancements in technology, it's important to remember the people that run our organization. Teamwork, high performance, empathy, failure, experimentation, trying new things. And often we can draw parallels with sport. And today is an absolute cracker. I got to sit down with Olympic medalist and swimmer Jenna Strauch. Enjoy. So we're not here just today to talk about you as the medalist, because obviously we are, and we will talk about that, but we're here to talk about performance, decision-making, leadership, coaching, setbacks, failure, all those kind of things that come with sport that have such a good correlation to business as well for our listeners and more broadly. But let's start right at the beginning. So in a swimming context, because you are who you are, but you were a late bloomer to swimming in the broad scheme of things. What made you get into swimming in the first place?
I didn't start competing until I was sort of 12, and which is sort of late. You kind of often see swimmers that go to an Olympics sort of progress through from learn to swim straight into it. But I fell into it because my dad had an old football injury, and it's a really unique thing that I was a terrible sleeper as a baby, and as a child, I should say, and he used to take me off mum, give her a little bit of a reprieve, and we'd go early swimming, and that's how it started. I then took on board what a lot of other people wanted from me. They're like, oh, you're going to be the next big thing. Like, you're amazing. Like, you're hitting all these things. You're showing these paths. And it wasn't until reality comes hitting that you sort of realize that it actually doesn't mean anything if you're not in it for your purpose and your why.
What went through your mind from a mental perspective when you were thinking about the winning and the expectations from others?
I think it was me taking that on board and being like, oh, well, they think I'm going to do this, so I have to do that. And it was sort of hard to manage, but I was just very driven. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do that and I'm going to do it better.
So obviously you had great success at the junior championships, but then you came ill. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I fell ill with 3 parasites I think I had in the end, and it wasn't so much the parasites, but then the sort of co-issues that I had along with that around metabolism and whatnot, and losing a lot of weight and trying to just get myself functioning again. And that was the hardest time for myself and my family, because my family had moved from Bendigo to Melbourne. Yeah. So we lived sort of a big sacrifice. And I think I wore that for a few years, that, we've given up a lot to move here and to help me progress in swimming. And it's not all of a sudden I'm not doing successful. What does this mean? And I'm lucky that, again, my parents have this attitude that, opportunity. And then being in those challenging times, you have to stop and reflect and work out, like, why am I actually doing it? And knowing, going through that sickness, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I could walk away now. It's been pretty tough, but, like, I know I'm capable of more.
Yeah. Do you think that's unique to top performance athletes? Do you have to be a bit, I don't want to say unhinged, but like, are you unique in the way that you approach things? Because that mindset's pretty strong, right? I mean, everyone is trying to achieve something, I guess, but to the level of getting to the Olympics and obviously becoming very sick, but then still thinking about where you could get to. How does that play in terms of your mindset for overcoming those challenges?
Yeah, definitely. It plays a huge part. And I think you've got to really sit down and work out why you want what you want and what does success mean for you. And that's what makes you so good.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, you can find it hard sometimes to sit in the success. And in the Australian swim team, we've got such high performers. It's very easy to sit back and be like, oh yeah, that was great, but so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. I can be better. And I think that's what makes us really good at what we do, because we seek feedback, we take it on board. Like, when you commit to something, you have to see it through. And I think that's what you see so much across all high performance is it's the commitment to the cause and the commitment to the success, whether you reach it or you don't reach it is different.
Yeah. And how important is you mentioned communication and feedback, but how important is communication there?
It comes back to understanding who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And how do they respond? Like my coach, he is amazing at what he does, but he often is very in the moment. But if I speak to him early and make him aware of it, it gives him time to think about it and process it, come back to me if he doesn't agree, but then we revisit it again closer. because that's how I know he will sink in. And then vice versa for him, he knows that I really love feedback.
And are there really impactful things that have stuck with you that he's said or guided you in the past, like things that have helped you set your own mental course and that purpose, that why you talked about?
Yeah, he's very passionate. And that really helps my why when you see it lived out in someone, that he genuinely loves swimming and loves what he does. And that is quite contagious. And that's something that I will really take away from him in his leadership style, is you've just got to be passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And have a way and be like, irrespective of what it looks like, you make it happen.
Enthusiasm to lead the team.
Yes.
Yeah,
yep, totally.
And you mentioned as well, you've now had the privilege for the last 3 years, I think, of being on the leadership team for the swimming.
Yeah, the Australian Dolphins. Yeah.
Yeah, and what role is that to start with? How does that work?
Yeah, so we're an athlete leadership group. There is sort of 3 of us. It gets sometimes to 5, but I've been consistent over the last few years, where I guess it's sort of like a captaincy, but not a captaincy. You're trying to like work within the team to guide and shape culture and where we want the team to go. And a big shift was we wanted our team to feel, and the group before us had started the work on this and we've progressed, and it's not about the outcomes or the performances or the best athletes, but it's trying to make them feel valued as people, because that's how they get the most out of anyone anyway. As soon as you start valuing someone, they're going to put their best foot forward. And so really trying to work out a way to bring people with very unique personalities together. And that's the hardest part, to be honest. Yeah. And so that's sitting on that leadership group. A thing that we've found the most challenging is how do we have influence and bring people together when they're not actually on a day-to-day basis in the same space.
Yeah. So what tips and tricks have you got? Because if we think about today's world shifting massively towards advances in technology like generative AI, et cetera, that, will help people do their job, optimize ways of working, but the human element and being a person and having those people skills, those soft skills you mentioned, EQ, are super important from a teaming environment, but also for leaders to think about how they can get most from their team. So how do you do that?
A lot of it really, as simple as it is, come back to constant engagement. Seeking people out, picking up on social cues throughout the year and checking in with people, picking up the phone and having a call, and actually having that, or even face-to-face, that communication dialogue that doesn't exist just within those, 4 weeks that we're together, that there is that sort of connection. And look, we have a great culture sort of going now, and nothing's perfect. And you have in the workplace too, and in sport, you're not all there because you all want to be friends. It's not like the people you're always going to go out and hang out with on the weekend. You're there because you all have a common goal. And I think highlighting the common goal and understanding and valuing different people's weaknesses. And I guess even if you take it back to the relay, like the women's medley relay that we won silver in, that was with Kaylee McEwen, myself, Emma McKean and Molly O'Callaghan. And for myself, I did have times where I was like, really felt this full like imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
But it's taken me a while to be like, yeah, well, they couldn't have actually won that relay without someone had to swim the other leg. Like, it's a 4-leg race. And my point out of that is not so much to be like, oh, they needed me, but more to be like, everyone has a value or a space within a team.
And there's a huge amount of study out there that shows that the more diverse teams are those that are more innovative, more creative, and obviously deliver those results. So different backgrounds, different experiences add to that value. And obviously you're all high performers and good at what you do, but your nuances, I'm sure, bring in that value in any teaming environment. And if we go back to Paris now, so you obviously were at Tokyo before. Now you're back in Paris, second Olympics for you. What did you learn from Tokyo that helped you or sort of gave you an advantage maybe when it came to Paris?
So I was 10th at that games in my individual event, and I went for one event, the 200 breaststroke. And I remember walking away from that, finding it pretty hard to not feel like a failure. Because by definition of I was surrounded by, and no one else said this, but you just become to think that like success is determined by winning a medal. And I looked back and I was like, hang on, like if I had have said when I went through those challenges at 13 that I was actually going to go to an Olympics, I would have been like, wow, that's success. But at what point does success shift and move? And I think that's what I took away. The biggest thing from that experience was that for me, success has a lot of different meanings than just a medal.
Yep.
But the medal was a driver. It was definitely a driver.
Yeah. And that's a learning from the experience that you had there and then. And ultimately, anything, whether it's business or in life, etc., nothing works out perfectly the first time. Otherwise, we would just do that thing. And so failure is a given. Many organizations really struggle with the concept of failure because obviously they're there to increase revenue, market share, stakeholders, whatever it might be that they're trying to perform for. So the concept of failing is very hard to come by, but in reality, you've got to be able to fail to learn from that failure and improve and change. And so how was that for you? Because obviously you qualified, did so well, came so close, and then did at that point fail. But how do you then deal with that? So what is the support system and surrounding, et cetera, that you go through to make that learning or that failure into a learning for you?
Yeah, great question. And the notion that fail fast is super important, especially when you're trying to progress a business, or for us to progress in a sport. It's you have to fail because that's how you learn, first of all, but you got to do it quick.
Yep.
You've got to do it so quick because the next thing's around the corner. The data can provide you that non-emotional sense of what failure versus success is.
Yep.
Because when you break things down, there are moments when I'd be like, oh, that race was just like terrible. But then when I get the data and I break it down, I'm like, oh, actually, no, like this part was a success.
Yep.
But this part was something I need to work on.
Yep.
So being able to take the emotion out of it, talk about it, and then take the emotion out of it and become more process or action driven is the way that I personally find
using the big
that.
front part of the brain to think about strategy and performance rather than necessarily the emotional part of the brain.
Yes, but you can't undermine that. So you got to give yourself space, let it out with someone, and then really bring that forefront of like, well, what's next?
Yeah. And you talked about the medal being a potential outcome or success from what you're trying to achieve, but there are other aspects to that. And I heard Jess Coronas say that, who's the GM of performance, for your team. I heard her mention that you focus on the process and performance and what you're trying to sort of get out of your training and your swimming rather than the end outcome. Talk us through that. Explain how that works a bit more in the team and the squad.
Yeah, definitely. It is a whole idea, I guess the way I like to frame it is success is a reward for good process. And it took me a long time to work that out because you're like gold medals are everything, making the Olympics is everything. That's what we idolize or consider success. But they're actually just like a bit of a pat on the back for doing things the right way. So the more you can kind of let that go and be like, that is actually like an outcome or a reward for nailing the things that I do on the day to day.
And I think in business, there are so many parallels with that because it's easy to think about the outputs you want to try and achieve, but ultimately you've got to identify the right inputs to be able to measure. And if you can't measure and quantify those inputs, then you'll never be able to drive to that output you're aiming for or the goal that you're trying to achieve. And so there are lots of parallels that we can draw there. But when you've, as you have, now achieved that success and you've got that medal, is that now the minimum? Does it shift the idea of, focus on the process and don't worry about the outcome so much to, hold on a second, I've now got a silver Olympic medal. Is that now the new bar? Is that a minimum expectation for you?
I think you'd be lying if you said no. I think that's just the nature of the human psyche. Like once you hit that, like if you dropped below that, it's what you deem as failure, right? But I think there's this whole thing for me that I'm starting to understand more now is that my original driving force was the fear of not reaching my potential. So like right now, silver medal, like amazing, yeah. But there's always another way to be better. Like I always could be better, right? But you're never going to hit that ceiling because that's the person that you are. Your potential just keeps creeping out. So, yes, it sets itself as a new benchmark, but I think we have to be realistic about the fact that there really is no benchmark because you're always going to look to something more.
So you're trying to be obviously the best in the world and you've clearly got that driven mindset to get there, do better, to achieve, etc., which is something that I think we need to instill into so many people. But what does that mean when you're trying to beat every other single person on the planet in what you do? what's the trade-off you have to make there when it comes to sacrifices in life?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, I guess I can look back now and like, oh yeah, that was sacrifices, but they're actually not sacrifices, they're choices. They're moments in your life you have to make a decision on what you value or where you see your time. There's only a certain amount of time in a lifetime, in a day, and it's important to be balanced. And I think you end up with, sort of your family section and friends and all of that. You've got work, and for us, that's being an athlete. And then you've got any other side projects, your health, your fitness, that kind of thing. So if you're trying to work it out, there's going to be times in your life where you have to pull out of one and put into the other. But I think it all cycles through, right? So leading into an Olympics, you're spending a little bit less time with your friends, a little bit is going more into your high performance bucket. But then a time comes, say now, where I'm taking a bit of a break, it's post-Olympics, where I can start to pull out of that and invest more in my family and friends, or invest more in these random other hobbies that I have, or passions that I want to make something of. So I think it's really important to try and understand that if you just continue to take from everywhere and put in, it's going to feel like a sacrifice, because all of a sudden your relationships are failing, or these other projects are becoming too stressful and you've got too much and you're overwhelmed, as opposed to being like, okay, well, for now, this is where my focus is.
Yeah, so less kind of this idea of work-life balance, just life balance, right?
Just life
Finding the right
balance.
things that are moving for you at the time.
Yeah, it's not one or the other. You can have it all. It's just a timing thing on which one's priority at that time, and how much of your 100% is going into there.
Yeah, and thank you for making time for us in your downtime. Really appreciate that. And let's talk about data. You mentioned that before, but there are so many internal things clearly for you when it comes to performing at your level, your mindset, the way you train, your nutrition, things that you can control. But there's so much that comes from outside as well, like stimulus that helps you, a coach, people around you, the leadership team, your teammates. What role in today's world does data play in you as an athlete?
It is everything at the moment, and I didn't realize how much of it was until I started talking about it and realized, hang on a second, like data is really driving my whole life, and especially when it comes to swimming and high performance.
But it feeds back into the process you talked about.
Exactly.
So having that process, you can now use this data for insight.
Yeah, like we knew the process, and that, say, we knew a target, and that's probably a better word than I would like to use for success, is it's a target. So say the Olympics, that was our target event.
Yep.
And we worked back from there and worked out from the data where I was struggling. And we set up a bit of a training on top of my regular training around focusing on the tiniest little things of like the time spent from my hands touching the wall to my feet, and different skills that we could do around that. And did that for about 6 months, leading into the World Championships in 2022. And that was like by far probably one of my best meets ever. And I came second, my first ever international medal in the 200 breaststroke. And then actually we got the data back and looked back, and in those skills, I had matched the best in the world.
Wow.
In a short space of time,
yeah.
It had really changed. But even so, the data had then directed my training program.
Yeah, it's a great example of knowing what to capture as well, because data, like we talked about earlier, is absolutely everywhere, right? And there's measurements and things that have been taken the whole time, but it's the insight you get from that. Is there one specific takeaway for you that's changed the way you approach things from that? Like, what's the one insight that you've taken?
So when you're looking at data, there is so many options on what you can look at. And for us, they could be feeding us all this information, but it becomes like so consuming, and you just feel like you've got way too much going on, and what do you focus on? And so that's why it's so important to sit back and really nail, say, the key takeaways at that point in time, and have regular sort of check-ins.
Yeah. And you mentioned feedback earlier as well. And generally, I feel like athletes are sort of open to feedback because the mentality is performance and getting better, etc. What does constructive feedback look like to you?
Constructive feedback is any feedback. Any feedback is constructive. Positive feedback is like, oh, okay, I'm doing the right thing, keep going, and sometimes more powerful than constructive feedback. I think we get very much caught in how to be better sometimes, that we need to be told that what we're doing is good.
There is a challenge for many companies who are trying to be more or just get growth basically, or find ways to innovate or be more agile or respond to changing needs, that they're in a culture that is very nice. And nice isn't kind typically. Being clear is kind. And so by the sounds of it, getting the right message, but also your appetite to seek that feedback is definitely helpful when it comes to your performance individually.
Yeah, you've got to want to know how to be better. And it comes back to that whole idea of nothing's ever good enough mentality, which, is a virtue and a curse at times. But you want to know how you can better yourself and better those that are around you, as opposed to just sort of being like, okay, I'm good and I'm in a nice environment and I feel safe. And it's quite a, cliche, I guess, sort of thing, but it's so true in lived experience. Like, the uncomfortable situations are the ones that are going to give you the most.
Yep.
And if I think back on it, majority of the times, the most I've taken away from it are the times that I would consider I've technically failed.
Yeah. And again, many people are crippled by this idea of we have to have success. But then that becomes like a program of work. Let's set like a way of trying to execute this, but that's not genuinely going to move the needle or change something. So trying those different things is important, but you might fail.
Yeah, 100%. But if you're not failing, you've got a problem. Like, you want to fail. And it's not nice. It's not a great thing to feel or work through. But if you fail, you're on the right track because you're making change.
Yeah. Who is Jenna the leader? What's your role like? What's your style as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's evolving. I think as a leader, I would really like to live in a space where I don't have a formal title, right? Like, that I can influence others around them to get the most out of themselves, and that they too can lead, whether it's leading themselves or leading a team. And a leadership coach that I had, one of the things that he sort of said to me was, your job is just to create more leaders. It's not about who you are. And I think it's that selfless approach to leadership that I really value. Is I don't need to be considered a leader, but I want to be able to enable change and enable impactful development on other people, and how they can be like, oh, wow, I can get the best out of myself, and they then become a leader. You have to be the one that's prepared to stand up and be clear on your drive and what direction and where you want to go as a collective. And you have to be strong in that, and you have to be able to give people that security as well, to be like, okay, they know what they're doing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
Oh, it's a good question. I'm on a break from swimming, and then I have to work out what am I going to go again or not, like another 4 years. And it's a huge commitment. It's a lot of times, and I think as you get older, you put more on hold. You have to be prepared to put your life, or what a typical life looks like, to really pursue something. Expectation
outside of sport, back to that life harmony.
Yeah. Yep.
Good.
And we'll just make it up as we go, but in some ways direction. And I really want to hopefully pursue a place which exactly kind of similar to what you guys are doing, where we can bring sport, high performance sport, into the corporate world, and vice versa, because I think there's so many correlations, so many in just the ways that you create high performance. You bring people together, you push them on to a common goal, whether it is building revenue or even less than that, just bringing a team to hit a KPI.
Yeah, perfect way to end and say all the best for the future. Congratulations on everything you've achieved so far, and thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights with us. It was really enjoyable, so thanks for being with us.
No, thanks for having me, Rich. It's been great.
Cheers, Jenna. Thank you.